The appointment card was still on the kitchen counter when Sandra came home that night. She had walked past it every morning for 6 days. Tuesday, 9 a.m., Dr. Okafor. And every morning, Victor had smiled at her from across the kitchen and said the same thing. Just a wellness check, baby. Couples who stay healthy together stay together. And she had laughed. She had actually laughed. She did not touch the card. She stood in the doorway of her own kitchen in her nurse's uniform with her ID badge clutched in her fist, and she looked at that card until her vision blurred. Then she sat down on the kitchen floor and did not move for a very long time. Sandra Eze had spent 4 years working at St. Augustine Private Hospital in Lekki. She had seen things in those 4 years that would rearrange a person permanently. She had held hands of dying strangers. She had watched families dissolve in waiting rooms. She had learnt the specific silence that falls over a ward when a patient does not make it through the night. She was not a woman who frightened easily. She was not a woman who panicked. But what she had heard in that corridor had reached inside her chest and rearranged everything. She had met Victor 11 months ago. He had come to the hospital to visit a patient, his mother, he told her, who had been receiving dialysis treatment for 4 years. He was standing at the nurse's station looking slightly lost, and Sandra had offered to walk him to the correct ward. That was all it was supposed to be, a 2-minute walk down a hospital corridor. But Victor Okafor was not a man you walked away from easily. He was tall and composed, and he spoke in the careful, measured way of a man who thought before every sentence. He asked Sandra questions about her work, not the polite, deflecting questions most visitors asked, but real questions, the kind that showed he was actually listening to her answers. By the time they reached his mother's ward, something had shifted between them in a way Sandra did not have a name for yet. He found her again 3 days later. He had brought chin-chin for the nurse's station, a whole tin of it, and he stood there with this slightly embarrassed smile and said, "I didn't know how else to see you again without being obvious about it." She laughed so hard she spilled her tea. That was Victor. That was always Victor. They dated for 5 months before he proposed. Sandra's mother had wept at the dinner table when Sandra told her. Her colleagues at the hospital had celebrated with her in the break room with plastic cups of Fanta and meat pie. Everything about Victor felt right, in the way that only the truest things feel right. Not loud, not performative, just steady and sure and completely hers. She had not thought it strange that his uncle was a surgeon at the same hospital. Lagos was not as large as it seemed. She had not thought it strange that Victor always seemed mildly interested in her health, asking if she had eaten, whether she was sleeping, making sure she took her vitamins. She had thought it was love. She had catalogued it as love and filed it away with everything else she knew to be true about her husband. She had been a nurse for 4 years. She had studied the human body, the failure of organs, the miracle and the mathematics of compatibility. She had sat in seminars about kidney disease, about transplantation, about the criminal scarcity of donors in Nigeria. She knew, intellectually, what a compatible match meant to a dying patient. She had just never applied that knowledge to herself. She sat on the kitchen floor for 40 minutes. Then she stood up. She went to the bathroom and washed her face with cold water. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. Then she went to the bedroom, changed out of her uniform, and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. When Victor came home at midnight, she was still sitting there. "You're awake," he said, surprised. He was still in the dark navy shirt she had seen through the door gap. She watched him set his keys on the dresser. She watched his hands. She noticed for the first time how steady they always were. "Rough shift?" he asked. He was moving toward her. "Yes," she said. Her voice came out completely even. "Very rough." He sat beside her, put his arm around her. She let him. She sat inside the circle of his arm and breathed normally, and felt the specific, nauseating horror of realizing that she did not know this man at all. She did not say anything that night. She needed to be certain. She was a nurse. She dealt in evidence, in confirmation, in the discipline of not concluding before you had the full picture. She needed the full picture. The next morning, she called in sick for the first time in 2 years. She waited until Victor left for work, Then she went to his study. Victor was a careful man. She had always admired that about him. He was organized, methodical, deliberate. She had never before considered that those same qualities could be turned against her. It took her 25 minutes to find the folder. It was in the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet, beneath a stack of architectural drawings from his firm. A plain manila folder, unmarked. Inside, her medical records. Not copies she had given him. Originals or near originals, printed from somewhere, stamped, annotated in handwriting she recognized as Dr. Okafor's. A blood compatibility report. Her name at the top. A compatibility score she understood immediately, and a handwritten note in the margin in Victor's precise handwriting. Scheduled, Tuesday. She has agreed to the wellness appointment. Proceed as discussed. She read it 3 times. Then she put everything back exactly as she had found it, closed the drawer, went to the kitchen, and made herself a cup of tea she did not drink. She thought about his mother, Mrs. Okafor, a small, warm woman with grey-streaked hair and the kind of face that had clearly been beautiful in youth, still striking in age. She had visited her in the dialysis ward 4 times since the wedding. She had held her hand. She had brought her zobo and chinchin because those were the things she liked. Mrs. Okafor had called her Nwami, my child, and she had felt each time that peculiar warmth of being claimed by someone you had not grown up with. She sat with that for a long time. Then she made her plan. She did not cancel the Tuesday appointment. She did not confront Victor. She went to work on Monday as normal. She smiled at the nurse's station. She completed her rounds. She ate lunch with her colleague Ngozi in the break room and laughed at Ngozi's story about a patient who proposed to her on his discharge day. She was by every visible measure completely fine. What she was doing, quietly and without anyone's awareness, was building her exit. She called her cousin Emeka, who was a lawyer in Port Harcourt, and told him she needed advice on something sensitive. She did not give him details on the phone. She asked if she could come to him on Wednesday. He said yes without asking questions. That was Emeka, always solid when she needed solid. She went to see a private physician, Dr. Amara Nusu, in Victoria Island, someone completely unconnected to St. Augustine, completely unconnected to Victor or his uncle. She told Dr. Amara everything. Dr. Amara listened without interrupting. When Sandra finished speaking, Dr. Amara was very quiet for a moment. "Do you have the documents?" she asked. "Photographs of them," Sandra said, "on my phone." Dr. Nwosu looked at her for a long time. Sandra, what they were planning, removing an organ from a non-consenting patient under the cover of a routine procedure, that is a criminal offense. That is not a gray area. That is not a family matter. "I know," Sandra said. "What do you want to do?" Sandra had thought about this for 2 days. She had examined it from every direction. She had thought about Mrs. Okafor's hand in hers, the warmth of it. She had thought about Victor's face when he looked at her, because even now, even knowing what she knew, she could not entirely dismiss what she had seen in his face all these months. The conflict she had heard through that door. "I cannot go through with it." She had heard that too. She had turned it over many times in the hours since. But his uncle had not hesitated, and Victor had not stopped him. "I want to be safe," Sandra said, "first. That is the only thing that matters first." She did not go to the Tuesday appointment. On Tuesday morning, she called Victor from her car, parked 2 streets from their flat. She told him she wasn't feeling well enough for the appointment and would reschedule. He was silent for 3 seconds too long. Then he said, "Of course, baby. Rest. We'll sort it out." His voice was perfectly calibrated. She had once found that voice reassuring. She drove to Port Harcourt that afternoon. Emeka listened to everything. He reviewed the photographs. He made calls. By Thursday morning, the Medical and Dental Council of Nigeria had received a formal complaint against Dr. Emmanuel Okafor. By Thursday afternoon, the police had been contacted. By Friday, Victor's phone was ringing in a way that told Sandra, without her needing to be present, that the walls were closing. She was not present. She was in Port Harcourt, in her cousin's spare room, eating her aunt's egusi soup and sleeping more soundly than she had in weeks. It was not the sleep of someone who had won anything. It was the sleep of someone who had simply survived. The investigation moved quickly. Dr. Okafor's records revealed that Sandra was not the first. There had been 2 other cases, both quietly settled, both women who had not understood what was done to them until years later. Both cases now reopened. Dr. Okafor lost his license within 3 months. Criminal charges followed shortly after. Victor was not charged. There was no direct evidence that he had physically participated in any procedure or formally authorized anything on record, but the investigation named him as a knowing participant in the planning. His architectural firm, which served several private hospital clients across Lagos, lost 4 contracts in the weeks that followed as the story spread through professional networks the way such stories always do in Lagos: fast, thorough, and without mercy. She filed for divorce from Port Harcourt. She did not return to their flat. She did not return Victor's calls. She let Emeka handle everything on her behalf with the clean, efficient detachment of a man who understood that some situations required a lawyer rather than a conversation. She was not vindictive. She was precise. 8 months passed. She transferred to a hospital in Enugu, a larger facility, better equipped, and far enough from Lagos that she could build her days without the weight of everything those streets carried. She was promoted to senior ward nurse within 4 months. She was good at her work. She had always been good at her work. That, at least, had never been complicated. She did not think about Victor constantly. She thought about him in the way you think about a fall you once took, with a residual awareness, a recalibration of how you move through certain spaces, a knowledge you carry not as pain exactly, but as permanent information. She thought about Mrs. Okafor more. That surprised her. She did not know for a long time what had happened to Victor's mother. She had not asked, and no one had told her. Then one afternoon, Ngozi, who had transferred to Enugu to follow a man who had not deserved her, which was a whole other story, mentioned casually over lunch that she had heard through the hospital grapevine that Mrs. Okafor had died 4 months after the investigation, still waiting for a compatible donor. Sandra put down her fork. "Are you all right?" Ngozi asked. "Yes," Sandra said, and after a moment she meant it. She had not killed that woman. She needed to be clear about that inside herself. She had simply refused to be killed first. The call came on a Thursday evening, 14 months after she had left Lagos. Victor's number. She stared at it for 3 full rings. Then she answered. He sounded different. The careful, measured composure was still there in the architecture of his speech, but something underneath it had changed, something structural, something load-bearing that had given way. Sandra, just her name, as if testing whether she would hang up. She did not hang up. "I need to speak with you," he said. "Not to ask for anything, not to explain myself. I know there is no explanation that changes what happened. I need to speak with you." She said nothing. "My mother died," he said. "I don't know if you heard." "I heard," she said. Silence. "I lost the firm," he said. "Most of the contracts. I've been doing some consulting work. It's not..." He stopped. "I'm not telling you this because I want sympathy. I don't want anything from you. I want you to know that I understand what I did, what I almost did, and I want you to know that the night in that corridor, I was going to stop it. I was going to call it off." "But you didn't," Sandra said. "No," he said, "I didn't." She let that sit between them for a moment. "What do you want, Victor? Not cruel, just clear." He said, "There's a patient, a 16-year-old girl in Abuja. Her family needs a kidney. Her family has no money. I've been connecting families to legitimate donor programs. I know it doesn't fix anything, I know that. But I'm trying to do something with what I know about how these systems work. And there's a doctor in Enugu. I've heard you are there, Dr. Fabian Obi. He runs a legitimate living donor program. I was wondering if you could speak with him on behalf of this family." Sandra was quiet for a long time. She thought about a 16-year-old girl she had never met. She thought about what it meant to be the person with the knowledge and the access and the professional standing that could open a door for that family. She thought about Victor's voice. Not the voice she had heard through the door gap that night, but this voice, this night, stripped of everything that had once made it feel safe. "Send me her family's information," she said, finally. "Her medical file, everything you have." He exhaled. It was a sound she had not expected, raw and unguarded in a way the old Victor would never have allowed. "Sandra." "Don't," she said quietly. "Send me the file. That's all this is." Yes, thank you." she ended the call. She sat for a while in her small sitting room in Enugu, in the apartment she had made entirely her own. Her books, her plants on the windowsill, her mother's photograph on the shelf. Outside, the evening was loud and warm and alive with the specific energy of a city that never fully quiets. She was not healed in the way the word suggests, a clean return to what you were before. She was different, shaped by something she had not chosen and would not have wished for herself. But she was whole, she was standing, she was still, undeniably, herself. She opened her email. She waited for Victor's message. When it came, she read the girl's file carefully, the way she read every file, methodical, thorough, fully present. Then she picked up her phone and called Dr. Fabian Ubi. "Fabian," she said, "I have a case I need to look at. A young girl, Abuja. Her family needs help navigating the GONA program. Is there time tomorrow?" "For you," Dr. Obi said. "Always." She thanked him and hung up. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel generous. She felt quietly and without performance like a person who had survived something and chosen to do something useful with the survival. Outside, the Enugu evening carried on, loud and luminous and completely indifferent to what had just shifted in one woman's sitting room. Sandra got up, watered her plants, made her dinner. Life, as it always does, continued.